justice is a response to conflict that brings victims, offenders, and the community together to try to arrive at a resolution that is just for all. Restorative justice provides victims with an opportunity to receive acknowledgement of their harm and to express what they need in order to heal. It encourages offenders to take responsibility for their actions, and it provides community members with an opportunity to become actively involved in the process of resolving conflict. As part of the consultation process, the Law Commission held a community forum on justice in Prince Edward Island. The purpose of the forum was to reflect on the opportunities and the difficulties presented by restorative justice. While there are several restorative justice models, we have focused on 3 in this video: sentencing circles, community justice forums, and victim-offender mediation. We asked a wide range of individuals with different points of view to reflect on the future of restorative justice in Canada. Our hope is that this video will encourage you to join the debate.
The Canadian justice system is one of the best in the world. That may not be good enough.
People who are involved in the justice system as offenders, I think they really reflect a lot of ills of our society, and which really is all of our responsibility to look at what do we do about it.
I see the restorative process as almost parallel to the court because it's focusing on doing the human work.
See some of the principal objectives as being to create or to enhance the ability of a community to solve its own problems. And that would include the promotion, as someone said, of equality. It's about relationships, I think healthy relationships, and by extension, healthy communities.
Crimes are not isolated events. Crimes have their soars deep into the roots of all communities. And so if you think about crime in that way, you think of crime as an opportunity and not a problem. It's an opportunity to find out what's wrong in the relationships that exist in that community. I mean, I often think that if 2 spouses are arguing in the kitchen about who's going to do the dishes or who's going to take out the garbage, and they think it's just about the dishes or the garbage, they're missing the sense and the essence of what that dispute's really about. And I think it's about much more than just who should do the dishes or who should take out the garbage. It's about a relationship flaw that has brought that to a conflict. And so when a kid does vandalism or does a B&E, there's more to it than just a B&E.
One of the basics of restorative justice was to start thinking about reclaiming conflict, to say that conflict can be something that can build community, not only break apart community. So rather than handing over the conflict to the criminal justice professionals out there, that the community should take ownership and use the conflict in order to build a sense of community.
I mean, the community itself must define its own issues and its own parameters. The community can even define who the community is, so that the community can be defined geographically. The community can be defined racially. The community can be defined economically. There are all kinds of different ways to define a community.
It's out of communities which conflict and crime arises, and it's communities that have to deal with the aftermath of crime and conflict. In other words, there's conflict that gives rise to crime, then there's the crime itself and all the immediate impacts, and then there's an ongoing aftermath of criminal behavior and conflict. And the community has to deal with all of those aspects.
Community means so many different things. Everybody's part of a community, part of a geographic community, part of a community of friends and family, part of a community of workers. We're all part of community, so it's a very vague term. And when you're talking about community involvement in restorative justice, it's never clearly defined what that means, and perhaps it can't be because it's going to vary from one situation to another. If people from the community, representatives from the community, are involved in a restorative justice process, it's very important that that be balanced, that the community not be there just supporting the offender, for instance, or just supporting the victim, but there be a good balance of representation so that all parties feel supported and feel included and don't feel pressured to accept solutions that they are not really happy with.
I think the specific objective of a restorative justice process is to create a process. I think it's really important that we don't think of restorative justice as the latest quick fix. I think it always struck me, I read something recently that really struck me, is we think about the number of resources we sink into preparing for war and the number of resources we sink into preparing for peace, and relatively speaking, there are almost none. You take that down to a community level and you think of the number of resources that we spend in trying to hammer things down, and the few resources we spend in trying to pull people together. So for me, it's about building capacity within communities to have a dialogue. It's building the capacities, particularly to have heart speak instead of just mind speak, so that people can really speak from the heart and not just from the head.
You can't, from Ottawa, design a program where you have the PhDs and the lawyers and whoever sitting in Ottawa, in a desk in Ottawa, even if they've worked in the field. You cannot design a program sitting in Ottawa that is going to be the same for the person in North Vancouver or Edmonton or Ecum or St. John's, Newfoundland. You cannot do it. The people in those communities must design the way that they are going to deal with their particular program, and the way they're going to deal with their particular problems, and the way that they're going to solve their own problems. It must be done from the bottom up. From the bottom, where the problems are generated, that's where the solutions must be generated.
The diversity of what we do is part of what is our strength, and it is also a tremendous challenge for us to take something as important as restorative justice and to roll it out across the entire organization and to institutionalize it, as I say. My vision for it would be, obviously, that we would institutionalize it, that it would become a part of the fabric of the organization, the way we do business, and I think we're getting there.
As soon as the state takes ownership of a project, then it inevitably draws away from the community. It draws away from their ability to really go with what they feel is needed. And again, it varies so much from community to community, both what people need and what people are able to give.
Aboriginal people in Canada have been through many important losses. There's been a progressive loss of culture, of language, of traditions. But one thing that has maintained and has been strong is our sense of community and our values. And one of the greatest values that we have is one that's called abigsiktarim, which is a word for forgiveness. But it's more than just forgiveness, it's a whole concept. It means a mutual forgiveness. It's the responsibility to forgive. The responsibility for the offenders to forgive the victims, for the police to forgive the offenders, for the offenders to forgive the police. It's a mutual forgiveness. And it's a responsibility that we have to work to resolve conflict, that we have to work toward healing, and using that conflict to build relationships.
Restorative justice initiatives are not so much about justice, but about peacemaking, about resolving conflict.
Conflict is a very messy thing, and it needs to be messy. We don't want to kind of tidy it up and put it so we can package it in some process. We need to have the capacity to invest the respect for the conflict by giving it the time and the capacity to move with it in its own internal dynamic.
One of the things that the criminal justice system does is recognizes harm and imposes a penalty according to the extent of the harm. And that's what many people consider to be doing justice. And the restorative justice system attempts to do both. So in other words, it attempts to restore, to reconcile, to do some peacemaking between the offender and the community, and at the same time, it attempts to do justice the way justice is currently done. And I think that the two goals are sometimes, not always, but sometimes incompatible. A sentencing circle effectively involves bringing together the offender, his victim, and members of the community that are, let us say, touched or affected by the crime. They may be family members of the accused, of the offender. They may be family members of the victim, friends, people with a stake, or people who claim to have a stake in the incident. They'll be brought together. There will be a judge presiding, although he won't preside or she won't preside the way judges do in provincial courts. They'll sit among the participants. There'll be some ritual ceremonies in some cases. And effectively what's happening is that there will be a discussion about the incident which gave rise to the offense.
I don't know how many circles I've done. It's over 300, and I would say only 2 or 3 now that I can remember, 3 that I can remember for sure, in which the circle did not get to a consensus about a criminal matter. And as a consequence, I, as the judge, had to sort of decide what was going to happen. But in all the other cases, I was simply another member of the circle, putting my piece in, watching the piece go around. People would reach a consensus, and from there we would then develop a plan. And the plan would have not just about the offender's needs or just about the victim's needs, but there would be all sorts of cross commitments and covenants about what people would do. So while the justice piece would be, I would take those particular things about the sentence and incorporate them in a normal court sentence, but they would be built around a whole bunch of other pieces. Sometimes there would be a jail sentence even, where the community thought that no, the punishment can be reflected in other ways, but in this case, in addition to other ways, there needs to be a jail sentence.
A community justice forum, as we would run in the RCMP, involves 1 or more trained facilitators, and it's likely to be more than one. And it could very well be a facilitator that would be one of our own police officers and a facilitator from within the community, or for that matter, either one of them. The offender and the victim of that particular crime must agree to participate in the forum. Obviously, it has to be voluntary. We explain the process to them, and we advise them right at the front end that they can bring other supporters along, which invariably would be their family, but on the other hand, it might be a friend or some other community member.
And of course, I lost them by the time I got into the crime.
The desired outcome in that, which most frequently takes place, is of course that the offender does or already has admitted to the act that they did. But it gives them the opportunity, and invariably they take it, of making amends with that victim, of saying, listen, I realize the effect that what I've done, what it's had on you, and the opportunity there, they themselves, or for that forum, to agree on what they should do to set this thing right. We've chosen a community justice forum because, as the name implies, it does involve the community, as opposed to other variations of that which don't necessarily involve them. We have trained members from the community as facilitators. So again, that gets the community involved, it gets the community taking ownership of these problems, and more importantly, of the solutions for it.
I think one of the things that we find really difficult as far as teaching young people the skills of conflict resolution is to confront things. You know, because a lot of us like to either, you know, accommodate to people's ways of dealing with things or to avoid it altogether. Do you know what I mean? But to actually sit down with someone and say, look, you know, I feel this way because my feelings are hurt. I can't, you know, I can't continue going on with, you know, being called this name or this name or this name, or, you know, with not being respected or whatever it is. Those are very difficult things to hear. And if it means that you need to change part of the way you speak to people, part of the way you act around people, part of the way you deal with people, you know, that's not an easy thing for you to do.
Currently, I'm working as the project director of a Collaborative Justice project at the Ottawa Courthouse, which is a demonstration project which is attempting to show what it would look like to apply restorative principles to serious cases of crime. This is a project which is attempting to demonstrate a comprehensive implementation of the best that we understand at this point about the restorative justice approach. So that means that when we work with, it isn't just about meeting, and I'm going to get to the meeting in a second, but what we do is we work with people for several months before that, assuming that all the parties want to be part of the project, offering individual support, information, talking to people about their safety concerns, that kind of thing, access to resources, all that kind of stuff. We do that with the parties individually. We provide this. So this takes a number of months. Can take anywhere from 3 months to maybe even 6 or 9 months. At that point, if they decide that they're ready to talk about the resolution, the reparation, then one of the options that they're given is, do you need to meet? And sometimes people want to meet for a variety of reasons. Somebody wants to meet because they want specific information that only the accused person can give them about why you chose my house or why you did this to me or whatever. The why question is a very big one for victims, and often they can't get the answers from me or someone else. They can only get them from the accused. They may want to look at the accused in the face and determine for themselves whether he's sincere, because we only accept cases, as I say, where somebody's willing to take responsibility and make reparation. But it may be that the victim is skeptical about that. They want to see for themselves whether this guy, they want to hear from his own mouth. They may want to express their own pain, the impact on their own life. They want to make sure that he understands what he did to them and the impacts. It wasn't just something on a certain day. Maybe it's carried on for 2 years, the impact for 2 years later. They may want to have a say in the resolution. So there's lots of different reasons why a victim may choose to meet. The accused generally is open to meeting because they feel in a position of obligation to the victim and they want to make it right. So they'll meet if the victim wants to meet, and they'll use that opportunity to open themselves to whatever kind of reparation steps the victim wants.
Before this accident, I mean, I'd had the occasional drink, but in the 6 months prior, now that I look back, I drank more and more, and I didn't realize that I was kind of going out of control.
Eve had consumed enough alcohol, I think, to be nearly 4 times over the legal limit, and in his confused state drove the wrong way down the Queensway.
I was going opposite to the traffic, and I would have missed a few other vehicles, including a tractor trailer, and ended up dead on with Mr. John Dubois.
The accident was immediately fatal for my father, and fortunately my mother survived miraculously with virtually just scratches, although what she had to witness that night was particularly traumatic for her.
One can spend all kinds of time in jail until he sits and looks at people right in the face. That's the only time he's really going to see what he's done. It was very hard, but I was also relieved when that first meeting we had was done. I felt very relieved because I actually faced these people, because I didn't know how it was going to go.
We met actually in an office with Jonathan arbitrating or mediating effectively. Eve was already there when I arrived, so I actually walked in. And of course you have developed a preconceived idea of what the person must be like, and Eve wasn't anything like I expected. I was struck initially by that he was just a regular guy.
I had said to myself back then that even if anybody in the family wanted to beat me up with their fist, I would let them, because there's nothing I could do to change that, and I deserved it. Nothing I could do.
He had naturally difficulty meeting my gaze, which again is not surprising, I guess, in the circumstances. He was petrified of this meeting, and I give him credit for that. It was probably one of the hardest things he actually did.
And also I mentioned to him that if I could, I'd give my own life to bring his father back. But I couldn't do that.
You're seeing that the man is affected. It's not question of he's this person who just doesn't care. He actually genuinely felt what he had done. And I think that is probably one of the biggest things for the victim side of things, is that there's a recognition by the person. It makes them human.
For me, it was the only thing I could give back to this family for having taken away a father, a grandfather, a husband. It was the only thing I could do is to let them tell me how much they were hurt or how much they were hurting. And I thought maybe it would help them if they could tell me that. It wasn't an easy task for me to do, but it is the only thing I can do for them. I can't bring this gentleman back.
Those that embrace the system and get the most from the system, the restorative aspects, which is fundamentally what it's trying to achieve, are those who let go. You have to forgive.
The only person that I didn't get forgiveness from yet is me. I'm the only one that hasn't forgiven myself yet, that I know of.
One of the questions from the audience related to revenge, and I thought it was an interesting question because I think that's a bit of a misperception. I'm speaking from working with victims, and what I see is not that they're after revenge, but they're after accountability.
When I phone up victims, they're surprised to hear from anybody. When you offer them an opportunity to, have a say, or to get some of their to identify and have some of their needs met, or for me to assist them to try to do that, like, this is all new territory. This is not part of their thinking. Our common collective kind of wisdom around criminal justice is that somebody does something wrong, the police arrest them, they go to court, and they go to jail.
Most victims, it's not really revenge they're seeking, it's justice. It's holding the offender accountable, and they may have ideas about what that means, and that may mean that the offender should spend some time in jail in order that the crime is seen as a serious crime. And once that's satisfied, then it may be possible for them to move beyond and look towards something restorative, especially in the more serious and violent types of crime.
People who are victims, they're frustrated by the current criminal justice system. And the current criminal justice system offers them nothing except the severity of the sentence as a symbol that society is taking their pain seriously. And of course, when they don't get any of the other needs met, they always are looking for a serious, heavy sentence. And when in many cases, it could never be serious enough because it doesn't actually address the needs that they have.
The women's movement fought for years for wife assault to be taken more seriously and to be treated as a crime. And if restorative justice means moving away from that and decriminalizing it, that's a real dilemma. On the other hand, individual women sometimes are not happy about proceeding through the criminal justice process. So it's a dilemma that doesn't have answers yet.
It's all about taking responsibility. The irony of our current system is that we want people who have done something wrong to somebody else to take responsibility. We hope that somehow punishing them or bringing them up before the courts, charging them and so on, will communicate to them that they've done something wrong and we want them to take responsibility. But the process doesn't, in fact, encourage them to take responsibility. I mean, the lawyer won't encourage them to take responsibility. The lawyer is the first thing the lawyer tells you is don't say anything to anybody, don't admit anything, right? And you go to a court process where the person never has a voice, the lawyer speaks for you, and it's a dance around technicalities. What can you prove? Not what happened, not what the truth is, but what you can prove. And then the person gets sentenced usually to, if it's a serious crime, to jail, in which case he's in an environment where he doesn't have to take responsibility for anything.
Restorative justice isn't always more lenient. It should be understood that a different approach doesn't mean it's lenient. Participating in some of these things, particularly the fatal traffic accidents where I've been involved in, where some of the drivers have met the deceased's family, been involved in public speaking, this is painful and difficult. and not easily done. And sometimes it'd be easier just to go and sit in a jail cell and watch TV than just examine your own soul and deal with these people.
And it's very difficult to sit across from some family whose child you killed with your car and admit that you did it and face them. That's real hard. Most of us want to run away from things that taking responsibility. We'd rather do anything but face them. So when people talk about you're getting an easier sentence because in that interaction with the family, you may agree to do certain things that are symbolically reparative for them, and they may offer some understanding and forgiveness to you because you put the whole thing in some kind of context and they see that you're remorseful. And it may end up that you don't get the same number of years in jail that you might have got without the project, but you've done a very difficult thing.
When we're really talking about healing in a community, trying to build communities, because when I think of the traditional offender, you know, on one side and victim on the other, and trying to resolve that as conflict in terms of a model, and then I reject that completely and totally as a way of dealing with a problem. If you're talking, on the other hand, about trying to heal this community, and the words that were used earlier was this balanced approach, then I think that I fall in behind Barry when he talked about building a process. And it's the process that must be worked out within the community, because it is about power. It's about who has power in society to make decisions that affect other people. And if you're coming to the table without power, then some sort of a process must be worked out so that all of us, each and every one of us, feel that we have some power.
When's the last time you know that somebody said, gee, I got so much power here, I don't know what to do with it all, you have some, you know? That's not going to happen. So it's very difficult for people with power to be comfortable to give it away and share it in a way. Just as from the other side, from the community, it's going to be very difficult for them to take power. I mean, their 911 mentality is, you do it. You know, that's what I'm paying you for. You do it. And what they don't understand is as often as they do this to us and say, no, we can't take over this, you take over that. When they do that, they lose. They lose the capacity of feeling that they're contributing to their community. They lose the necessary feeling of community that comes from connecting and contributing. And when we keep it, we lose that sense of really feeling that we're a part of a community as well.
One of the things I'd written down after I had spoken was the whole issue of human and financial resources. That as we're talking about this process, the goals and what we're doing, is if we're talking in a vacuum without the commitment from our society to implement this, to make the money available so that it's just not a downloading on the community of the responsibilities of government and bureaucrats. So those financial resources have got to be available so that these kinds of things can be implemented. And I don't know if that's part of the elements or part of the goal, but we can't talk about this in a vacuum without recognizing this is going to take a real financial commitment of government and community.
If we can redirect money from having youth incarcerated and keeping them in the community, then what we're doing is actually redirecting money back into the community and back into different ways to support youth. And there is, as many people are aware, a new Youth Criminal Justice Act coming out, and the whole purpose of that is to look at how do we, instead of incarcerating youth, how do we keep youth in the community? What are the alternatives? And the only way we're going to do that is if youth have a place in the community, and if we're able to really support youth to make sure that they feel part of a community, that they have access to opportunities, access to the services, without making them feel like they're the problem.
Restorative justice traditionally draws upon volunteers and people with training and skills that are not necessarily traditionally associated with criminal justice professionals, and it will continue to do that. And again, many people think that's a good thing because you don't necessarily need to be a lawyer or a police officer to know how to respond to crime.
It's in the interests of the state, it's in the interests of the federal government to download its services in terms of privatization and cutbacks onto the private sector and onto the volunteer sector. By developing these so-called alternative dispute resolutions and restorative justice programs, what it means is there's a use of volunteers in the system so that the system is much cheaper. It is much cheaper to work with people in the community than it is to imprison them and keep them in jail.
Our prisons don't empty out, they fill up, so we build more and we fill them up. And everyone knows that that doesn't work. So yes, there's a malaise, there's an unhappiness, and our laws, we are looking more and more, our legislators look more and more to mandatory minimum sentences, thinking that that's going to do it, but it's taking us back to prison, which never worked to begin with.
As it is, sometimes people feel that the criminal justice system doesn't treat crime seriously enough. The community tends to see sentences of jail as the appropriate sentence when somebody's done something wrong. And until we've had more experience with restorative justice, with perhaps the lower level offenses, or restorative justice at the other end of the process, once the offender has accepted accountability through the criminal justice process, until we have done a lot more in those areas, and the community begins to see that that can be successful, I think it's important not to go too fast into other areas, to expand restorative justice too quickly and to be too far ahead of where people in society are today.
I think it should be up to the police to encourage the community involvement, because they should say we don't necessarily have to be the people who are deal with it. Yeah, to deal with it all.
Not the politicians, not the Supreme Court. What can the community do? Not the professionals, not the experts. What can the community do to address this breakdown in community?
We will be pleasantly surprised over and over again by what people have to contribute to community.
If people take it on and own it and say, yes, we are part of this. Yes, we are responsible for not only the children in our house, but the children in our community, the adults in our community, that they are a reflection of us, and that it's together that we can use the conflict as a gift in order to soar.
We hope that this video has encouraged you to think about innovative ways of responding to the challenge of conflict. The Law Commission of Canada welcomes everyone to actively participate in the debate to help us ensure that the law is responsive and accessible to all Canadians. If you have any questions or comments about restorative justice or the work of the Law Commission of Canada, please contact us.